Y2K feels like a combination of Persona, Earthbound, and a slight sprinkle of Scott Pilgrim humor. Its colorful 3D art style might be a bit jarring for some, but dig past it and you'll find a quirky sci-fi mystery adventure. It's the late 90s and recent college graduate Alex has just moved back to his hometown. While exploring the new sights in the city, Alex finds himself deep in a missing person mystery. It ends up being a catalyst for his crazy sci-fi adventure filled with both old-time friends and new ones too. With the cast of fairly diverse characters that feel natural and encompassing for the late 90s era, it was an interesting, humorous, and also pretty depressing at times 25-hour story filled with plenty of Easter eggs throughout. If I had to compare it to anything, I'd say that the setup of the story feels a lot like Earthbound, while the whole side of the missing person investigation runs parallel to Persona 4. With that said, it has a highly humorous tone to it that also isn't afraid to get incredibly serious at times. Rory specifically stood out to me as having a humorous fighting style where he's completely pacifist, but also had moments of sorrow in his character arc. The rest of the cast of characters were mostly solid except for the main character Alex, who is a bit of a douchebag. Alex is your stereotype hipster character with a liberal arts degree. He constantly sticks his foot in his mouth, and sadly when it finally all does come around full circle for him, it's not to a degree that really feels all that satisfying. What the story does succeed on is capturing the 90s era where digital cameras were a new thing, arcades are still prominent, and TMNT and Final Fantasy VII are all the buzz. While the sci-fi aspects of the story could be a bit convoluted for some, I found the story to be mostly interesting, although not without a bit of corny dialogue from time to time. Y2K is an American-made Japanese RPG, or rather a Western RPG influenced by classic Japanese RPGs. Regardless of how you decide to categorize it, what's here feels authentic. You play as Alex as he wanders across his hometown and nearby areas trying to solve the mystery of the missing girl in town. Exploring the sandbox areas, you'll come across towns filled with shops to stock up items and equipment, while outside areas are filled with dungeons both for grinding and related to the game's story. The way the game is structured, you'll spend a lot of time tracking down clues across towns. These take you to new leads on your investigation and oftentimes lead to finding a new party member to tag along on the adventure. In terms of difficulty, it's not difficult at all. Y2K is pretty generous about holding your hand to your next objective. If at any point you're not really sure where you have to walk to for the story, you can open up the main menu, hover over the hint button, and it'll pretty much tell you where you need to go. Where the gameplay does branch out a bit is in its battle system and dungeon. Like most RPGs, you can purchase items in shops or just find them in treasure chests to use in battles. Along with your HP and power point gauge for skill attacks, you'll also have your standard array of attack stats. How you upgrade these stats and levels is perhaps one of the most interesting parts of Y2K though. But before I talk about that, I have to explain the battle system, and I'm a pretty big fan of it for the most part. It's a turn-based battle system with elements of real-time action. Think of the Paper Mario moments of landing a critical hit. It's almost like a mini-game in the middle of an attack to land extra hits on an enemy. There's even a little gauge at the corner of the screen that lets you slow down time to more easily hit specific attacks, although that gauge is limited. For the most part, I enjoyed the way this was executed, although in the more lower tier battles it can get a bit slow and repetitive. It stands out more for the bigger boss battles that are much more difficult. Anyway, as you fight these battles, you'll gain XP to level up your party. However, it's not done automatically. Instead, you go to the mine dungeon where you redeem XP to level up your character and manually choose which stats get upgraded. While it's certainly different than the usual upgrade system to other RPGs, I enjoyed the freedom of being able to focus on specific stats that mattered most to me, and sort of just build out my own party. Outside of the battle system, the meat of the game comes from the 6 medium to large dungeons throughout each of the story's chapters. They get progressively more challenging in terms of puzzles and enemies, although I never found them to be that difficult. Puzzles seem to be straightforward, usually asking you to use your abilities to get past obstacles like breaking rocks with your guitar and activating switches with the cat. Despite the dungeons not being all that challenging from a puzzle standpoint, at least not until you're like 2/3 into the game, they did provide the toughest battles with boss fights that were usually the cherry on top of each chapter. Ultimately, Y2K's subtitle, a postmodern RPG, feels incredibly fitting to the adventure. It feels like a modern day RPG, though still set in the classic times of those that define the genre. Its gameplay felt approachable while adding interesting twists to classic RPG elements. I personally wish that dungeons were a bit more challenging from a puzzle standpoint, but I still enjoyed the dungeons for the difficult fights they provided towards the end of them. Its gameplay overall feels mixed with interesting ideas and odd executions that don't always stick the landing, like how every battle has a very odd lengthy loading time to it. I also ran into an odd bug while playing the Nintendo Switch version. There was an issue where I ran away from a battle and it sort of just threw me into a dark abyss. No ability to do anything but force close the game and restart. Take that with a warning to save your game often, because that was definitely frustrating. It showed me not to always rely on the Nintendo Switch's sleep mode. Hopefully it's a bug that gets patched up quickly. It only happened to me once, but it did make me lose about 2 hours of progress, and I got pretty salty about it. Y2K has this really interesting 3D visual style to it that I find really hard to describe to people. It's incredibly simplistic and retro, yet colorful and modern. In a way, it looks like an 8-bit Super Mario amiibo, but as a video game art style. Even things like the animation of characters have this low frame rate to them that make them look like characters in the Wreck-It Ralph film. I completely vibe with the art style, but there are some elements to it that I think look a bit too dead to me. Seeing characters' dull and dead expressions during conversations with full-on character art on display just looks weird to me. I personally wasn't a fan of it. I even had friends watching me play the game ask if the girl speaking was a different girl from the avatar in the background. In terms of performance, I played on the Switch and it mostly ran fine. It ran at 1080p in dock mode, 720p in handheld mode, and the frame rate looks like it runs at 30 frames per second, though it's somewhat difficult to tell with this type of art style. But there were certainly moments where the frame rates dropped in specific parts of town. I noticed a few frame rate drops in a specific part of town, like where there was a lot of characters on screen, or just one specific corner where you're about to enter the overworld map instead. It didn't really seem entirely like a performance issue, but rather some sort of bug with the game with that specific point of the map. Regardless, it wasn't a big issue for me to really care or notice. One of Y2K's most stellar presentation features is the lineup for its soundtrack that's a mix of lo-fi synth songs that capture the nostalgic tones of the story. The artists behind the soundtrack are no joke either. You have the likes of Hiroki Kikuta from Secret of Mana and Toby Fox from Undertale both lending a hand to the game's music. The love and passion given to the music run parallel with Y2K's voice acting. Despite me not liking Alex as a main character, I found his performance along with Yuri of Wynn's job as Rory to be captivating. It's pretty rare for an indie level RPG like this to have fully voiced dialogue, so the attention to detail is really appreciated. Y2K, a postmodern RPG, is a game I was incredibly excited for. It made it into my top 10 anticipated games of 2019 earlier this month. While I did like some aspects of it, it didn't entirely live up to my anticipation, sadly. It's ambitious in wanting to be a college version of Earthbound filled with plenty of self-aware humor and 90s nostalgia. Its writing at times can be as good as those classic RPGs, but not for long before dialogue gets a bit corny and an unlikable character steals the spotlight. It seemed for everything I liked in the game, I had an issue for it too. It's an RPG that I really wanted to enjoy. I did enjoy it to some extent, but didn't end up loving as much as I was hoping to. I give Y2K, a postmodern RPG, a 7 out of 10. If you want to keep up to date with my video game reviews every single week, then hit that subscribe button and check out my Twitter and Instagram linked in the description down below. You can also find my gaming usernames for Nintendo Switch, PS4, Xbox, and PC down below. Thank you all very much for watching, hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you all in the next one.